Before you stands Gisline, the reckless eldest son of the penniless noble Perdium family. Everyone in the mansion, including the servants, was terrified of this brat as if he were a monster, and frankly, they were right. He was notorious as a vile and disgusting person with a cursed character. Until that exclusion becomes unbearable. Slipping away before being kicked out, Gisline became a mercenary and spent years on the battlefield. He gained such insane fame that he became a legend as one of the 7 great warriors of the continent. When he became an adult, he realized he was a total mess, and his family was absolutely right. He came crawling back to the kingdom for forgiveness, only to find his family and homeland destroyed by a treacherous plot. When that massive war between kingdoms ended, Gisline was about to draw her last breath on a bloody battlefield. The noble swordsman Eden asked for his final words while announcing that the war was over. Our guy was upset that he couldn't get his revenge. While Eden wished for his death, our bratty kid giggled and mocked even on the brink of death. Out of nowhere, Eden asked about the boy who left his family after his sister's death. Gisline wondered where this information came from. Eden finally let the cat out of the bag, admitting he was tired of digging into Gisline's dirty past. Gisline was shocked to hear they teamed up with the Dolphin family to take down the Perdiums. He realized the Dolphins weren't the only ones behind this, but Eden found it pointless to waste words on a man who'd soon be dead. And what do you think the result was? He had never been this angry in his entire life. Eden finished the job, but instead of dying, he felt a strange sensation. His body rejuvenated, he drifted back to the days when he was a useless punk, and especially to the memories of the sister he lost. When you open your eyes in a room and look at your hand, thinking you definitely just kicked the bucket. Every cell in his body ached as if being stretched on a rack. The pain was so sharp that for a moment, he wished he hadn't returned from the grave. Just then, the door creaked open and a shadow slipped inside. The servant rejoiced to see her master open his eyes, but Gisline looked like he'd seen a ghost when he found Belinda before him. He was frozen stiff with shock. Unfazed, the woman began to nag, saying she was worried to death and that he should leave dancing with those damn orcs to the soldiers. But our boy shut her up and hugged her so tight, it was as if he'd break her bones. The poor woman was dazed and confused, wondering what kind of mess she had gotten into this time. Belinda was the only teacher who could handle that troublemaker Gisline. She was a saint. But after the family's tragic downfall, the woman simply vanished. And not a trace of them was seen again. Now, she couldn't understand why the man was so overjoyed, as if they hadn't seen each other in years. After all, they saw each other's faces every day. Gisline has finally decided to put her cards on the table. He dropped the news like a prophet, warning that a disaster was about to strike the mansion, leaving the woman frozen in fear, but he saved the real bombshell for last. Gisline stared at him like a maniac and confessed that she came back to life after dying. Thinking his wires were fried after taking an orc club to the head, Belinda humored him. Right after, he implied that the disaster he spoke of didn't hit the mansion, but his own head instead. She started giving him a good earful for his recklessness. But ours was used to hardships. He wasn't surprised at all. But when Belinda asked what would happen if she couldn't go to the festival because of these wounds, things took a turn. Hearing this, Gisline froze as if watching a horror movie. Belinda reminded us that Helena was looking forward to that day, so excited she couldn't sit still. Turns out Gisline was taking the girl to the festival. The maid saw this as a great opportunity to break the ice between the two. Gisline remembered that damn festival held this time of year. Because of that chaotic chain of events in the past, she could never enjoy that day. Everything was ruined. When she asked about the festival, the response was, "1 week to go, good morning." Suddenly, it all clicked for him with that answer. Suddenly, another uninvited guest burst into the room. When she heard that familiar voice, Gisline's mind became a mess. Those traumatic memories he spent a lifetime fleeing were back to haunt him. His sister was going to die in exactly 1 week. The moment he saw her, Gisline ran and clung to her like an octopus. Belinda was in shock. Helena startled, thinking her brother was up to another dirty trick. But Gisline was only crying out how much she missed him. As for the girl, she shoved him away as if saying, "Get away from me, creep," her skin crawling with goosebumps. Groaning in pain, Gisline wondered when the girl had gained such monstrous strength. With a deep, weary sigh, Helena said these clingy attitudes wouldn't change what happened in the past. At first, Ghislaine didn't understand what the girl was talking about. Turns out, her daughter had recently said some unspeakable things, and Helena was still reeling from those toxic words. Ghislaine was surprised. Their relationship used to be like a refrigerator. He realized his mistake and apologized sheepishly. The bewildered girls chalked up his strange behavior to the bloody battle with the orcs, but Ghislaine insisted he wasn't the one getting beaten. He was the one slapping those green giants around. His scream was cut short by a sharp pain piercing his body. Watching him, Helena said this was likely why he was dragged to the mansion unconscious. The girls looked at the situation and giggled. Hiding, he watched them silently for a moment. Then a bittersweet smile spread across her face. Because those before them were as vivid as in their memories. In the past, he used a failed trip as an excuse not to go to that damn festival. What utter foolishness. This cowardly decision went down in history as the last moment he saw his sister's face. Afterwards, the poor girl and her guards tragically vanished into the darkness of nothingness. Ghislaine was tearing herself apart because she couldn't be by her brother's side during that hellish moment. Then, someone suddenly started pounding on the door. 2 guards appeared, looking for Helena, fake embarrassment on their faces for this untimely intrusion. They said they need Helena to oversee the festival preparations due to a personnel shortage. Ghislaine couldn't help but wonder why a noble was being worked like a common laborer. Belinda mumbled that even Helena had to pitch in sometimes due to a shortage of staff. Watching his brother, Ghislaine realized in that moment what a blind and neglectful jerk he'd been in the past. Suddenly and unexpectedly, he offered to help. Hearing this, Helena turned around in shock as if she had just seen an alien. The maids were now certain that their master had taken a heavy blow to the head and lost his mind. When they left the room, the place was as loud as a battlefield. Helena refused Ghislaine's help because she knew no one would want to work with this troublemaker. Ghislaine calculated Helena's body would be found far from the festival, meaning someone must have dragged her there. To prevent this disaster, he had to memorize every entrance and exit of the castle, including the mouse holes. Just then, he heard someone's footsteps approaching. Ghislaine recognized the man the moment she saw him. Standing before him was faithful old Fergus, completely out of breath. The old man rushed here as soon as he heard what happened to the platoon. Helena whispered that Ghislaine was acting strange, probably going mad, and that Fergus should take her back. Ghislaine accepted that for now, he had to play the fool and move slowly to gather information. Right after that, he asked the old man to take him to the abandoned, ruined training ground. When the old man asked why, the young man replied with icy calm that he was going to practice. Fergus couldn't believe his ears. When he took the child to the right place, Ghislaine was mesmerized by what he saw. It was more perfect than you imagined, like a hidden paradise. Despite years of mercenary work, he never found such a perfect training spot. The old man said they kept this place ready in case it was needed one day. Because Fergus naively believed his master's struggles would resolve themselves in time. At that moment, Ghislaine suddenly remembered that Fergus had always been this loyal in his past life. Thinking about this cast the young man into a dark depression. When she said she wanted to live a long life and that death wasn't for her, a strange chill ran through Fergus. It was as if the boy were speaking from the experience of death himself. Ghislaine shot back sarcastically, implying that he really had died and been reborn. While Fergus thought it was a bad joke, Ghislaine said goodbye to him. The young man thought to himself how hostile he'd always been to those around him, but in reality, he was just a blind fool. But now he knew. She was only 1 week away from everything falling apart. Neighbor Fifer found out that one of the lords was behind Helena's death, dragging Perdium into a bloody war. Finally, Ghislaine clearly understood that all the disasters began with Helena's death. So he decided to change fate, starting by training his own physical body. He had very little time, but he didn't care. Ghislaine was determined to clear the way for them. Mana is that supernatural, divine power that lets humans break through their limits. Releasing and accumulating mana wasn't for everyone. It was considered a very daunting task. But Ghislaine could do this even during the bloodiest moments of war. All they had to do was feel the mana particles and gather them at a single point. For a man who had survived tens of thousands of deadly battles, forming a mana core was child's play. But that wasn't the only thing that made Ghislaine one of the strongest. This success was also achieved thanks to the forbidden methods he read in that mysterious book he found. And this way, our guy managed to create multiple mana cores, and all three were interconnected. This technique could restore her lost power, but Ghislaine's current body might not be able to handle the burden. In his past life, he could create 5 cores, but his current capacity was only 3. This method allowed power to increase at the speed of light, but in return, it demanded a massive amount of mana. And that was the real reason for Ghislaine's embarrassing defeat against Eris. When the meaning ran out, he was caught defenseless. The technique wasn't very reliable, but it would do for Ghislaine for now. With use energy and plenty of free time, he was determined to decapitate Edu and wipe out the Delphin family and their servants. Ghislaine was going to wipe them all off the face of the earth. A week later, Festival Day arrived, and Ghislaine appeared armed from head to toe. Helena froze in shock when she saw him. It was a strange and unprecedented situation for his brother to join such an event. But he had to go, as he was representing the family. Helena noticed he had changed and realized her brother had been training like crazy all week. The young man asked what the problem was with the family heir receiving training. Helena reminded him that she had told him the exact opposite before. When Ghislaine said he wanted to be a lord without a ceremony, he was stunned when Helena threw those words right back in his face. Helena continued with a warm smile on her face. And she said these changes in her brother only made her happy. It even felt to him like the old, kind-hearted Ghislaine had returned. The young man was shocked to hear this and fell into a deep silence. With this change in behavior, he'd truly learned an important lesson this week. The wheels of time began to creak, and the threads of fate were already becoming knotted. Even if major events stood still like a rock, the smallest step our boy took could trigger a butterfly effect and mess up the future. With the future's cheat codes in his mind, he had to devise the most devilish plan for every trouble. If life is a game, he was playing it on the hardest mode. While preparing for the upcoming apocalypse, he spent the entire night roaming the streets, devouring street food with his insatiable sister Helena. The poor thing was like a leaf blown about, following her brother everywhere. Despite years of weariness, Helena threw herself into everything at the festival as if seeing it for the first time. But with the festival drawing to a close, Ghislaine still hadn't sensed the approaching trouble. But it wouldn't take long for him to realize this was the calm before the storm. Suddenly, the sounds reaching their ears signaled that the script had begun. The knights cast their line, saying there's a new kind of fun just ahead. As Helena took the bait, a realization flashed in Ghislaine's mind, and she instantly figured out the puppet master behind this setup. It turns out the family was nurturing venomous vipers in their own bosom. The blind trust in Philip and Simo, who'd protected Helena since birth, was actually their death warrant. The knights brought Helena to the place they mentioned, all right, but there was no party or anyone there. It was a total ghost town. While Helena wondered who could possibly have fun in this wreck, Simo grinned smugly, saying everyone would show up soon, trying to stall her. But our princess was upset there was no one around in such a desolate place, her noble face slung in a pout. Ghislaine, ignoring their nagging, had already plunged into his own dark world. At first glance, this place looked like just another ordinary back alley filled with thugs. But the barricades blocking the exit screamed that this was a slaughterhouse. The boy's strategic analysis was suddenly cut short by his sister's shrill voice. Even though Simo tried to hold the girl back, Helena grabbed her sister by the arm and tried to drag her away. Ghislaine was horrified by his brother's gorilla-like strength. The dazed girl, staring at her brother as she walked, didn't notice the mass of flesh in her way and slammed into the man like hitting a wall. Seeing the sickly and perverted look on Philip's face as he begged them to wait a bit longer, a seed of fear was planted inside the girl. While Helena cried out that the knights were acting strange and asked what was wrong, Simo shamelessly babbled that their intention wasn't to scare her. Helena got goosebumps when they said they only had one innocent request. Just then, another figure stepped out from the shadows. Frank arrived with 2 masked sidekicks, wearing a filthy grin as he told them the job was handled cleanly. As expected, Simo stated they did what was necessary and wanted to seal the deal with the betrayal money, the blood pact. but Frank's eyes fixed on what he thought was a lapdog next to Helena. The guy who recognized Gisele instantly said he didn't include this fellow in the package. Seymour said he came along like a promotional item, then our boy dived straight into the conversation. Asking how he thought they could sell them like peanuts, Ghislaine told the night wannabe to only think of his own life, and that they'd take the money and bolt. He confessed they were sick of this poor land and misery, and that anyone clever was already fleeing like rats from a sinking ship. Sick of hearing the trader's nonsense, Ghislaine used the element of surprise and dove into battle like a predator. Blood spurting from his mouth and the massive gash, Jamal could make no sound but a muffled grunt. As the trader's body split in two like a watermelon, everyone froze in shock. Ghislaine at least joked that the others aren't human trafficking. Turn to the next victim, Philip. The knight, terrified nearly to the point of wetting himself, used Helena as a shield and reached for his weapon. But in the blink of an eye, Ghislaine had already landed her lethal strike, sending her enemy straight to hell in a single move. As Adam breathed his last, he could only whisper that this was inconceivable. As his lifeless body slumped to the ground like a sack, the bandits muttered rumors about how the eldest Perdiem's son didn't even know how to hold a sword. But their leader was certain that the killing machine in front of them was Ghislaine. As for the two knights, they paid for their negligence with their lives. With the fascinating brutality of the attacks evident, a trembling Helena asked questions, trying to understand what was going on. But Ghislaine didn't even bother to explain. With one brutal, sudden move, he knocked his dear brother out cold and sent him to dreamland. After picking the girl up and gently setting her down, he finally turned his face to the bandits who thanked them for doing their dirty work. The man already confessed they planned to take out the knights, and added that Ghislaine is nothing like that softy they described. When the bandit implied that the boy was hiding his talents, Ghislaine drew her sword and confronted them, asking what business it was of theirs. Gripping his sword tightly, he scanned his three remaining opponents. The two figures behind him were like the buzzing of flies to him. But the intense wave of mana radiating from the leader showed the gravity of the situation. Ghislaine decided he had to end this quickly by ripping his head off. Before he attacked, the thief asked who gave the order. He grinned wickedly, saying that the dead have no need for gossip. Ghislaine was of course not surprised by this answer. Still, he swore to smash that smirking face and make him sing like a canary. The man ordered those around him to capture the boy alive, but to break his arms and legs and drive him crazy in the lap of despair. With a spine-chilling smile, the creep preached that a painful lesson must be taught first to create a true masterpiece. The moment they got the order, the two thieves lunged forward like rabid dogs. But Ghislaine stood before them with a deadly calm, preparing to dance with incredible agility. As the thieves attacked in a swarm, Ghislaine suddenly threw that strange object that had been thrust into their hands. By the time the thief realized it was a firework, it was already too late. Frozen in shock, he didn't know what hit him when the blow landed right in his face. Just as Ghislaine sliced through the fireworks, he ruthlessly plunged his sword into the man's face. Meanwhile, the other bandit sneaking up from behind thought he'd catch the young man off guard, but as if he had eyes in the back of his head, Ghislaine skillfully parried the attack. The moment swords clashed, he twisted the hidden man's arm, snatched his weapon, and tossed it away like a piece of trash. In that split second, he drew his own sword and took the thief's head right off his shoulders. It was a clean execution, smooth as butter. Just then, a whistling sound was heard from above. Seeing his lackeys being slaughtered, their leader finally decided to join the fight. But that guy's cool entrance went to waste. When Ghislaine even countered the attack from his blind spot, the guy's brain melted. He couldn't figure out what happened. While he wondered how someone with their back turned blocked that blow, Ghislaine had already faced him and locked onto his prey. Dazed and confused, the man didn't even see that lightning-fast blow to his neck. A thin cut was open on his neck. Even the pipe in his mouth had snapped in two, but the man proved to be stubborn. He kept swinging his sword. Ghislaine easily blocked this final struggle, too. In that moment, the man had to respect the power of the mystery. If it weren't for the meaning, his head would have been rolling on the ground long ago. Ghislaine noticed the man had gathered all his survival instinct in his neck area. As for the thief, he couldn't fathom how this kid got such talent at this age. Still, putting on that classic villain arrogance, he began to swear that Ghislain wouldn't get out of here alive and was digging his own grave. As he spoke, his surroundings began to glow with a threatening aura. Ghislain claimed that he could never be defeated with those meager mana reserves. With that twisted glint in his eyes, he was imagining how he would carve up the young man and torture him. But that eerie smile spreading across Ghislain's face as he hurled death threats cut the man's excitement short. The young man snaked past the enemy's sword and took advantage of that moment of shock to counterattack. The thief flew back meters from the kick to his stomach, but still wouldn't swallow his pride. What a stubborn goat he was. But just as he was about to brag about those damn mana reserves again, the words got stuck in his throat and his speech was cut short. As blood started gushing from his throat, the man fell to his knees and began to cough. The impact seemed light, but the effect was devastating. Ghislain had shattered the protection spell that the man trusted so much. Now, walking calmly toward his prey, he hit him with that bitter truth. Furious from learning the conspiracy behind his sister's death, Ghislain's eyes were bloodshot, and he was ready for a massacre. Sensing the massive and unexpected wave of mana coming from the thief boy, he finally realized he had made the mistake of a lifetime. Before he could even think, the cougar pounced on him. The only thing the man had to admit was this brat's inhuman speed. While the thief desperately tried to counter the relentless attacks, Ghislain leaped into the air to land that final, bone-crushing blow. He struck the man's weapon with his dual swords with such force that the thief's arms began to shake violently, and his bones started to crack. Even though he was just defending, his sword was cracking. The man had never seen such a wild and intense release of mana in his life. The boy before him was gone, replaced by a bloodthirsty demon as if straight out of hell. With one last blow, he shattered the hidden man's sword, and now nothing stood in his way. The defense had collapsed. With that sickening sound of steel cutting flesh, blood began to flow like a waterfall, but Guts' rage showed no sign of fading. Instead of pitying his defenseless prey, he raised his sword once more to drive it deeper, into more painful spots. As the man howled in pain, Ghislain pressed his hand against the thief's bleeding throat and shoved him back hard. The hour of torture was just beginning, and in the middle of that bloodbath, with a spine-chilling calm, he invited the man to chat as if he were just having tea. Without a single expression on his face, he wanted to know which scoundrel ordered this assassination. But instead of giving up, the thief drew the dagger he had sneakily hidden. Turns out the real target wasn't the sleeping girl, but our crazy boy. At least he was determined to take the mystery with him when he died, but just as he was about to throw the dagger, things changed. His hand hung suspended in the air. Ghislain locked the man with an invisible spell, giving a fake promise to sheath his sword if he behaved. If he'd quit his foolish heroics and talk, he could have had a painless death. The choice was his. When the thief realized that mana threads were wrapping around his body, he couldn't believe when this brat had prepared them. Ghislain had been weaving this trap stitch by stitch from the very start. Cornered, the thief was still rambling about warrior pride and how he could recover. But when the young man threatened to blow up his mana core, the thief turned pale as a ghost and began to tremble with fear. As terrible pain pierced his body, web-like cracks formed under his skin, and his mana drained away like a leaking balloon. While Adam was crying that we'd all die if we blew up, Ghislain literally mocked him, saying, "Only amateurs die from their own magic, kid." At that moment, the thief saw in the boy's eyes not a bluff, but pure and dark death. This brat had really gone crazy. He was about to wet himself with fear when he started singing like a canary, shouting the name of that damned count who ordered Helena's execution. Count Desmond's sick plot to start a war was finally exposed. But our boy Ghislain didn't even flinch. The guy was like an iceberg. In your previous life, all the dirty work was always dumped on the Duke's sycophants anyway. He was used to these situations. Ghislain asked if they used Helena just for their dirty games. The man across from him smirked smugly and nodded in agreement. While approving, he didn't hesitate to plunge the sword in his hand deep into Ghislain. The maniac was wheezing like he was drowning in his own blood, yet he still dared to ask why the Ghislain broke the deal. Instead of suffering, Ghislain burst into that bone-chilling, maniacal laughter of hers. And she told the thief that he was like a lion when killing others, but now that his time has come, he's turned into a cowardly chicken. The man was stunned when his victim laughed in his face. Once the shock wore off, he made a final desperate stand, claiming that even if he died, nothing would change and the gradient matter was already settled. But Ghislaine decided to force the thief's mouth shut and give him a little life lesson. Ours whispered with a giggle that they were reborn after death, and this time the script would work out completely differently. The moment she finished speaking, she put him in so much pain that he regretted ever being born. Just like he said, the mana explosion leveled everything, but Ghislaine brushed off the dust and came out without a single scratch. Out of breath, he turned his head and saw Helena sleeping soundly on the floor. The man tossed the sword aside, threw his head back and let out a deep sigh, saying, "Oh, what a relief!" But in that moment of relief, he felt the blood gurgling up his throat. Ghislaine collapsed where he stood, coughing up blood as if his lungs were being torn out. He started chanting curses. His strength had never betrayed his body like this before. Staring at the door across from her, she promised herself she wouldn't throw in the towel no matter what. When he rushed inside, he was once again met with that sinister pentagram and another corpse lying on the floor. Ghislaine already knew that the body was there. He walked up to him without hesitation. And if there's any truth to that thief's ramblings, Ghislaine knew exactly whose body this was. The person lying on the ground was none other than the great son. At a glance, he saw they were murdered and framed on Helena. But as soon as their deaths were heard, war would break out. So he decided to clean things up, saying if there's no hidden evidence, there's no crime. After setting the building ablaze, he grabbed his hidden sister and fled the scene. But just as they were leaving, a peeping mouse was watching, and he decided to go snitch on everything he saw right away. Before long, everyone realized the mission was off. The thieves were showered with insults, but the spy scrambled to save his skin. He said Ghislaine personally intervened to keep Helena from being killed. When people heard the name, they didn't even take him seriously, mocking him as just a wimp. Suddenly someone spoke up and said everyone knows what Ghislaine's really like, so that excuse is worthless. The spy objected, shouting that the man he saw was nothing like the loser they described. There was a world of difference between rumors and reality. The spy suspected that someone else had taken over the boy's body. He immediately changed the subject to degrade and said starting a regional war would be child's play. Now he was begging for one more chance. But everyone saw him as a helpless bug and decided to pull the plug. Just then, an authoritative voice interrupted everyone. The man asked what kind of luck a thief would need. Then he promised that he would personally eliminate Ghislaine, because he had a hidden ace up his sleeve. Everyone's ears perked up at this, and they waited with curiosity. The person they were talking about was Kane Rogers, that famous snob known for his sword techniques. Since Kane is Ghislaine's cousin, it wouldn't be hard at all to pit these two against each other. Everyone who heard this was surprised, but they stayed silent. Only the boss with the greatest power deigned to speak. Adam gave the thief a final warning, saying if he messed up again, he'd lose his head. Back at the center, Fergus was about to treat our boy to lunch when a blinding light flashed before the old man's eyes. This sudden light wrapped itself around the sword leaning against the wall. And then the sword glided into the hall as if carried by a ghost. Ghislaine caught the sword midair, swung it a few times and noted, "Not bad, huh?" Just then, she noticed someone entering the room. Fergus apologized to the youth for interrupting his training, but he couldn't help asking how he did that trick. Ghislaine showed off her talent once again by pretending not to understand what Ferguson was talking about. He explained in technical terms how he manipulated objects like puppets using mana strings. He had done this many times before, but now it took all his strength to control those strings. Still, if Ghislaine used a single thread and managed the mana carefully, the same level could be reached. Fergus thought he knew everything about mana training. But he had never seen such a stunt in all his life. He thought about how Ghislaine hadn't used mana recently, but now she was showing off like a master of 40 years. Then he remembered something important he had to tell Ghislaine. Fergus bowed deeply and thanked Ours for saving Helena. But Ghislaine brushed it off, saying it was no big deal. Helena admitted that she couldn't convince anyone Gisela saved her. That's why she asked her brother to tell everyone the truth. But Ours said no need for ads and turned it down. Melinda was fuming over what those two knights did, but she'd been suspicious of those types from the start. Ghislaine knew Helena was hiding a lot, but he was more than happy to let some secrets stay buried. It felt as if the apocalypse of war had hit the snooze button for now. But our Ghislaine couldn't save the world alone. He needed an obedient army. Just then, a servant bringing room service also caught him. Ghislaine was deep in philosophy about how much power it takes to rule the world when his dreams were cut short. Calling what they put in front of him food would take a miracle. In the middle of the plate sat a dry piece of bread, looking back mournfully. Our guy had the audacity to ask Belinda if they were bringing the dessert right away. The poor girl hit them with the bitter truth. "We're poor, sir, we're struggling." Then, a bellowing sound was heard from outside, as if the apocalypse was breaking loose. A man was yelling at the top of his lungs in the street, demanding compensation for the cancelled festival. But the man was not alone. Behind him was a crowd, fuming with rage like a horde of zombies. They were all like powder kegs. The public thought the Count's family was swimming in money. Guyline was about to jump out of his skin at the chaos he saw when he glanced out the window. With a very calm demeanor, Beline confessed that she knew this disaster was coming. Turns out the local shopkeepers pinned all their hopes on these festivals. They struck gold last year, but now that the festival's been cancelled on day one, they're absolutely livid. Guyline froze at the gravity of the situation. If he doesn't intervene, this will end in bloodshed. Things were going to get out of hand. Tell Fergus and the soldiers to calm this rabid crowd at once. He gave the order, but old Fergus dropped a bombshell with a bitter smile on his face. Which soldiers were forced to say, "Sir?" Turns out most of the soldiers went deep into the forest to hunt. In the beginning, their lands were already a battlefield due to endless invader attacks. On the other side, a forest crawling with monsters. Guyline had turned purple with rage. There was neither money nor soldiers. He turned to Belinda in despair, giving her a look that said it was time for a reckoning. "You're in charge of the cash, you should have used that money to silence the merchants." She snapped. But the girl just shrugged and said the safe was bone dry. With a devious smirk, she reminded him that the Count had forbidden giving Ghislaine any money. Because the old Guyline had squandered the money. Ours faced the bitter reality after a short shock. He was a penniless wretch. He had the nerve to ask her for a loan, but she was flat broke too. After that miserable dinner, he started brooding in his room. They had nothing left to lose. Imagine knowing the future when the writer's hands were tied with a hole in his pocket. He was at rock bottom when someone ran down the hall toward him in a panic. When a knight burst into the room, his scream was loud enough to vibrate the windows. Guyline jumped from the window and roared, asking what happened again. Ricardo is out of breath. They managed to say we're in big trouble. Kane wanted to see Ghislaine. The moment she heard this name, Guyline's eyes widened in shock. The guards couldn't handle things until Guyline arrived, so poor Scovin bore the brunt of all the rage. Kane's hands were covered in the man's blood during that brutal attack, but the psychopath didn't even care. He continued to beat the knight mercilessly, like a punching bag. His blows were so forceful that Scova's armor was crushed like paper. By the time Guyline arrived at the scene, Scovin was already trashed. Seeing his young master, it was unclear if the poor man trembled from pain or joy. But our boy was frozen by the brutality Kane showed the knight. When he heard that terrible sound, the boy forced his gaze away from Scovin. Standing before him was Kane, who was many times his size. Kane scanned him from head to toe like a predator watching its prey and nodded. Guyline gave his cousin a bone-dry, icy nod. Would Ghislaine ever forget this face? This guy was the heir to the Loch lands and their so-called ally. And young Kane had proven to be a total war machine. This bully used to be Ghislaine's only friend. But the truth was bitter. They were actually bitter enemies. As Kane walked toward them with heavy steps, Guyline asked Ricardo, "What the hell is going on here?" Ricardo told the story while trembling. They found Kane, who caused the scene at the tavern. Kane's there asking about the truth behind the rumors about Guyline. It starts by asking if what I heard about this pathetic Ghislaine is true. The commander tried to explain everything, but he was cut off. Kane is furious that she lied to Scova right to her face. Ricardo ended by saying, "This is how we arrived at the bloodbath I see before me." Kane didn't buy the lie that Guyline killed the orcs. He beat the hell out of the commander, demanding the truth. The funny thing is, Guyline was guilty again. Because he was the one spreading the rumors himself. Guyline was speechless. What could he say? Because he remembered the old days. Cain always treated him like a lackey. No matter what trouble he caused, no one dared to say a word. Because Guyline would obey him. Guyline, raised with an inferiority complex, and Cain, whose arrogance is mistaken for leadership, the perfect duo. Cain's arrogant and aggressive attitude was seen as a fitting trait for an heir. Guyline let out a bitter chuckle. While he was always being criticized, this psychopath was being praised. Cain watched him like a snake eyeing its prey. He was grinning, thinking to himself that this loser used to scream and cry over the slightest little thing. But the real shock came when he was ordered to kill Guyline. In exchange, his family was promised support. Cain reminded them that Guyline was also an heir. I mean, he couldn't just squash him like a fly in the middle of the street. They advised me to set up a duel, make it look like an accident, and finish him off. Cain's guys said this was an opportunity we couldn't miss. Even Cain didn't expect the order to butcher his own cousin, but an opportunity is an opportunity, right? Ours didn't even hesitate, just dove headfirst into it. That scum Cain must have sensed the change in Ghislaine, and he couldn't wait to get rid of it. With a sneaky chuckle, she asked what Ghislaine was up to. Since he came all the way to him, Cain should have laid down the law. He was implying that it was time for protection money. They had ruined the festival, but Cain was determined to kick the fun up a notch. He thought they were on the same wavelength when it came to fun and vibes. Ghislaine, meanwhile, was lost in deep, dark thoughts. She didn't get his gibberish at first, then the penny dropped. Whenever this parasite showed up, he'd always beg for booze and women. In the past, Ghislaine would have tucked his tail and complied just to avoid a beating. But that era was over, he wouldn't spend a dime. Belinda's words echoed in his mind, and suddenly it all clicked. He was practically frozen in place. The source of money he was looking for stood right before him as Cain in the flesh. A sharp roar interrupted the thoughts. Cain ordered everything to be laid out before him immediately. His patience had run out. Ghislaine knew about this celebration and accepted, but on one condition. First, these outstanding accounts needed to be settled. Cain's dazed. What account was she talking about? Ghislaine, with a devilish grin, noted that interest had also been added. He had to pay exactly 1,000 gold. Cain tried to respond, seething with rage. Supposedly they were friends, or so he said, but Ghislaine really put him in his place. Not a friend, he was treated like a total doormat. He was going to give the money to that kid, he'd take it by force if he had to. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Ricardo couldn't make sense of Ghislaine's madness. Cain sat up and roared, things had gotten serious. What nerve! Ghislaine was being insolent beyond measure, and Cain added that the price for it would be heavy. You couldn't get stronger by spreading rumors of victory. As he clenched his fist, he began to radiate that menacing, crushing aura. Everyone thought Ghislaine was just a loser who's all talk. Cain stepped forward to finish the job. But Ghislaine was ice-cold calm. He dodged the punch like a knife through butter. Cain attacked again like he's rabid. Another miss, he's just hitting the air. The moment he was left vulnerable, Ghislaine's blow hit his flank like a sledgehammer. Cain was out of breath. Ghislaine seized the chance and attacked again, but Cain blocked the kick. Our guy was a bit surprised by this, actually. Suddenly, the man collapsed like a mown crop and began to bray in pain. His sidekick rushed to his side in a panic. Ghislaine, stop whining, I saw you blocking it. Dees and his wingman pushed Ghislaine back. The guy was supposedly rebelling against the injustice. The place was in total chaos, and everyone was wondering what had happened. That was the moment Ghislaine figured it out. He understood what Cain was up to. The blood on the ground whispered slyly. He was asking if he played his role well. Those jackhawls turned Ghislaine's game to their own advantage. Cain grinned and started taking things out. It would both secure support and relieve the boredom. It was clear he meant to pull the dueling glove from his pocket. But before I could even finish, things got messy. He was stunned after a glove slapped him right in the face. The floating leather glove had found its target. The first challenger was Ghislaine. Cain froze, his face still stinging from the slap, his mind gone blank. Ghislaine cried out that she was publicly humiliated and attacked. Could he deny it? A deathly silence fell over the place. Cain thought this fool was digging his own grave. He told him to give those final, regretful looks as he drew his sword. But ours brushed off Kane's threats like they were nothing. She calmly turned her eyes toward Ricardo. Ricardo gathered the merchants and announced that their money would be paid soon. The festival's cancellation had ruined everyone's mood. Everyone looked grumpy, but with money still in their pockets, they were secretly looking for the thrill of spending it. Ghislaine decided to put on a bloody show for the people to relieve their stress. The stage was set, the show was starting. The moment has arrived, the duel has begun. Spectators had already opened their betting books, the excitement was at its peak. Kane is fuming that this turned into a cheap circus act. He growled that his sword knew no mercy. He wouldn't stop, even if she begged. Ghislaine didn't answer because it was obvious Kane's true intention was to shed blood. "Let's begin while the crowd is hyped up," said Ghislaine. But just then a cracking voice intervened, objecting. Someone cried out that the bet was unfair. The crowd stood frozen in shock. The bookie confirmed the situation. Because no one had invested a cent in Ghislaine. Our guy wasn't surprised at all, he seemed resigned to his fate. The public at least wanted some sucker to play Ghislaine. Kane mocked it, saying it wouldn't even sell in this loser market. Bets are on how many seconds Ghislaine will survive. But suddenly, an unexpected bet was placed. The defeated Skoan invested his entire fortune in Ghislaine. He grinned as a heavy pouch of coins landed on the table behind him. Things were heating up now. Helena and Belen also suddenly burst onto the scene like harbingers of doom. As Ghislaine's mind reeled at the sight of her sister and the maid, the crowd watching was absolutely speechless at the scene. Noticing Helena, the crowd felt it was time for this circus to end. Belen, meanwhile, tried to step in frantically, struggling to prevent the approaching disaster. As the thief walked by, grimacing as if he'd stepped on something foul, Kane gritted his teeth, impatient for the duel to finally begin. With that needless pride of being older, Ghislaine implied that making the first move was beneath her and against the code. He drew his sword and brandished it menacingly, taking his battle stance. Allowing him to attack his opponent was like sending a child to the park. Kane looked at Ghislaine's behavior with disgust. Thinking how pathetic it was to act superior now, his expression read as pure contempt. He suddenly lunged at Ghislaine like a rabid dog, but his cousin managed to counter the vicious attack. Kane was frustrated by his opponent's desperate struggle to survive. Ghislaine, whose only concern was protecting his own skin, stumbled under Kane's heavy blow but tried to recover. Attacking his off-balance prey once more, Kane wanted to finish the job. But Ghislaine slithered like a slippery snake, dodging the blows. When he ducked, Kane kicked, but it looked hilarious as his kick just swung through thin air. Spectators were sure this skinny kid would be crushed by a single serious blow. Hearing this support from the crowd, Kane's ego had hit the roof. While Kane gave a nasty smirk, Ghislaine raised an eyebrow, analyzing his opponent as if solving a puzzle. Belen trembled with fear, watching in utter horror. Duel thought he had to be stopped immediately. As for the thief Ghislaine, he's about to kick the bucket. That massive hunk of muscle called Kane was grinning filthily, relying on his physical advantage. His only plan was to wait until poor Ghislaine's lungs failed, and then crush her head. After all, he'd won every fight so far using this cheap tactic, tiring his opponents out until they were spent. But in the chaotic heat of battle, Kane changed tactics once he realized the kid wasn't so clumsy after all. He spun his sword like a pinwheel, grabbed it by the blade, and brought it down on Ghislaine as if swinging a sledgehammer. But wait, it was a trap. When Kane suddenly pulled the sword toward him, Ghislaine, still gripping the hilt, was flung forward like a packaged crate. And then, with his bare strength, he grabbed Ghislaine and threw him into the sky. While the crowd held its breath, that scent of brutality on the right reached all the way to the stands. While Ricardo trembled, fearing the young man's bones would be crushed, the thief rubbed his hands in the corner, enjoying watching Ghislaine die. What a cruel mother! Gravity did its work, and Ghislaine plunged toward the ground at full speed like a meteor. But the strange thing was, there wasn't the slightest look of fear on Ghislaine's face. He was as relaxed as if he were going on a picnic. The moment he landed, he decided to make Kane pay for that insolent move. With a single move, he closed the distance instantly. He was so fast that half a second after getting in Kane's face, he attacked. Cain didn't even have time to blink, let alone block it. His circuits were already fried just trying to keep up with his opponent. Even the bandit was in shock. Ghislain pumped mana into his legs, maintaining his balance with superhuman precision. After the attack, he exhaled that dirty air from his lungs. Cain had nothing to do with using a sword. His only trick was intimidating rivals with brute force. Ghislain was there to teach her the true meaning of pain. Feeling this humiliation, Cain exploded in a fit of rage. How could a tiny brat make a monkey out of him like this? He swung his sword wildly, but Ghislain arched his body like a bow and kicked Cain right in the face. Not enough, she even used the man's hand as a springboard. He leaped into the air and spun like a death spiral. He intended to tear a piece of flesh from the blood before hitting the ground. Furious, Cain tried to drive his sword home like a spear, but it was in vain. Ghislain slithered like a snake, dodging that lethal metal. Then he stepped on the sword so hard that Cain was pinned to the spot. Gripping his sword with the other hand, Ghislain landed that terrible blow on Cain's defenseless neck. With the cold blood of a predator pausing to eye its prey, he stared into his opponent's eyes, and seconds later blood began to spurt from the holes in Cain's body. The crowd went wild and screamed at the sight of this bloody spectacle. Surprised that events turned so bloody, Helena grinned with pride while Scovanda gave a sly smirk, but the thief was fuming with rage. Cain knew his wounds weren't deep, but his ego was bleeding more than his body because Ghislain could have ground him up like mincemeat if he'd wanted to. Cain's thick head just couldn't grasp when this brat had become a swordsman. The place fell deathly silent as he stared blankly at his opponent, but then he made a move that left Cain speechless. He tossed the sword in his hand aside like trash. He declared the power gap was like a mosquito's buzz and that he'd slap him with his bare hands. Of course, this insult was enough to drive Cain mad. But Ghislain wasn't holding back. He would use this pathetic opponent like a punching bag to teach him a lesson. He was dragging Cain's honor through the mud by saying his fists alone would be enough to end this. His opponent was about to explode with rage. Turns out our guy chose punches just to give his rival a head start. He even acted like a total gambler, betting 2,000 gold on his own victory. The audience began to whisper in shock. The duel had officially turned into a circus show. Even the thief froze in the face of this madness. Actually, deep down, he's happy. Poor guy thought Ghislain was digging his own grave. Right from that moment, bets started flying in the air. While the gossip was swirling, most people blamed Cain. But some hid and played at being crazy. Cain, with a mean smirk, found the situation amusing. With an artistic flair, he threw the cape, but look at his cunning. He kept the sword and decided to attack with the gun instead. Chaos peaked as Belian screamed from the sidelines to tear him apart. Before Cain even knew what happened, he took a punch right to the face. Ours just laughed off his opponent's thoughtlessness. He dodged the sword stroke as smooth as butter. At that moment, Cain was preparing to throw a sneaky kick. However, with reflexes kicking in like spider sense, Ghislain shifted stance and landed a heavy punch on Cain's leg. This time the punch landed right on his opponent's jaw. Cain staggered in pain as lightning flashed in his mind and bit the dust. He couldn't fathom where Ghislain had learned these martial arts. The crowd began to roar like a gladiator arena. People now considered Ghislain's victory a certainty. Meanwhile, his flunky Kani was shouting at him to get up. Because the show wasn't over yet. Losing all patience and seeing red, Cain struggled to his feet and lunged at the young man. Cain continued to swing his sword brutally. But Ghislain was dodging the blows as if she were dancing. In the heat of battle, Cain was going mad. That loser Ghislain, who was afraid to even look you in the eye until yesterday, was gone. Now, on the contrary, Ghislain was many times superior to him. The girl, twisting Cain's arm back, delivered a ruthless knee to his ribs. Cain was already completely worn out. But he clung to the obsession that he had to kill the fawn for his family's future. But he was like a helpless puppet against Ghislain, just taking a beating. Before long, he was nothing but a mass of flesh, trembling in pain. Ghislain approached her, grabbed her hair, and lifted her head. Out of nowhere, he surprised everyone by saying he felt sorry for Cain's father. Ghislain reminded them how Cain's father helped when the family business was struggling, thanks to their friendship. But Ghislain told Cainian to his face that he lacked that noble spirit. Hearing this, Cain froze in his tracks. Suddenly she remembered how everyone tried to convince her father not to help the Perdiums a few years ago. It hadn't even been a week since he wanted to help that family. Cain didn't understand it then and shouted angrily at his father not to go. His father had paused. Cain asked why he was so persistent in helping his father when everyone was against it. His father turned to his son and quietly said he saw Gisela's father as a friend. Cain froze when he remembered that conversation. Right then, Gisela wanted to throw another punch. Cain squeezed his eyes shut, waiting for his face to be smashed, but the blow never came. Gisela realized Cain had learned his lesson. Cain looked at the hand extended to him for a moment. Then he bowed his head in shame. He barely muttered that he accepted defeat. Not expecting this, the man was surprised. The crowd went wild and cheered at Gisela's victory. Gisela's family was over the moon with this victory. The bully screaming Cain's name ran toward him in a fit of rage. Was Cain giving up now? But Cain told the man to get lost and added that he would leave. The man was furious and shouted that Kani was a coward. Just then, Gisela appeared behind the man like a ghost. With that creepy smile, Gisela said it was finally time to collect what was owed. The man didn't understand what she was talking about at first. Then Gisela loudly announced that this man would pay for everyone's meat and drinks. The man turned pale upon hearing this and began to fume with rage. He shouted that she couldn't do such a thing without his consent, and that Gisela must take back her word. But Gisela put her hand on the man's shoulder. It was the price of defeat, and it wasn't even part of the bet. Gisela also reminded her to leave 2,000 gold on the table. And immediately after, he made the man's blood run cold by hinting at the terrible things that would happen if he tried to escape. Seeing Gisela's imposing and terrifying form, the man was struck with terror. Once the payment was accepted, Gisela left him there like a piece of trash. The next day, Gisela had grabbed the money. He thought he could hire a small group of mercenaries with this money. But that plan fell through because saving enough money would take a lifetime. Suddenly, Belinda and Helena burst into the room. Gisela asked them what happened. Helena sarcastically questioned what Gisela would spend that money on. When her brother asked if she needed anything, Helena said she was just asking out of curiosity. Suddenly, Belinda jumped in. She said it's plain as day exactly what Gisela is going to spend the money on. Later reminded me that Amelia's birthday is coming up. And Gisela was probably going to buy her an expensive gift. While the girls were joking around about it, Gisela just stood there in silence. Actually, he was even surprised by the fact that she had a fiancé. So he naively decided to ask about it. Belinda thought you were faking it. But Helena said they were talking about Count Riaford's daughter. Hearing this, Gisela's brain completely fried. But at that moment, she finally remembered who they were talking about. Amelia was loved by everyone for her angelic heart and kindness. She had already made her rebellious plans, destined to be known as the Witch of the North and turn the world into a bloodbath. This snake was also a partner in Delphi's famous scheme to overthrow the Gisela family. Our boy was fuming with rage every time he thought of this traitor. When Peter Bey asked when he would grace us with his presence, the answer was that he would return in a week. Gisela smirked. This time was more than enough for a revenge show. He was going to pay a quick visit to the Rayford family, but Belinda just stared blankly, saying the girl's birthday hadn't even arrived yet. Ours just brushed it off, saying, "I'm just going to settle some scores, honey." Amelia, unaware, was busy showing off her new shoes. Amelia tossed those expensive shoes in front of an ordinary peasant girl as if they were some kind of blessing. The poor girl started sobbing uncontrollably at this gesture. Our queen bee fed her ego again, claiming that only she has the privilege of walking barefoot on these lands. He then ordered the guards to provide food and shelter to the public, as if he were paying out of his own pocket. An order is an order. The soldiers got to work immediately. As noises rose from outside, Amelia stepped off the stage to applause. Back at the mansion, the poor servants had already started massaging the lady's delicate feet. His loyal dog Bernard wagged his tail, "Excuse me," showered him with praise, saying what a great job his owner did. The girl, meanwhile, said she knew well that her father ruled through fear, but the loyalty of empty stomachs was more easily bought with the promise of warm bread and shelter. Since Bernard won the people's love so quickly, he was certain the tide in the inheritance battle would now turn in Amelia's favor. The girls stopped for a second, there was a deep silence, and suddenly, Bam! She rearranged her loyal man's face with a heel kick. He immediately asked about the duel, the clash with the northern swordsman. Bernard, bleeding from his nose and mouth, muttered an apology and blathered about winning him over. Then he leaned down and kissed the very foot that kicked him. He swore the sword was his, but his master asked in a cold voice if that was how he'd been trained. He clenched his jaw as if to break it, and ordered him not to be a loser. Bernard reported that he'd been beaten up and the merchant guild took the supplies. Everything was ready for the checkpoint construction. They had even bought off those cowardly soldiers and knights who fled the lands of Perdium with a flood of gold. Amelia approved these dark dealings and told them to keep on their mask of an ordinary merchant. Just then, a servant stepped in and spoiled the mood. Word came from the gate. That man named Islam has come to visit. Amelia made a face. His voice wasn't hospitable at all when he asked what that lame punk was doing here. Trembling with fear, the maid didn't know what to say. But what they hear will shock everyone. It turns out he came for a matter involving the Gislam Merchant Guild. Soon after, Amelia found that unpleasant man in the living room. They sat across from each other, but the atmosphere was ice cold. Amelia didn't answer. Even the cat in her lap was hissing as if it had seen an enemy. Our girl told him to his face that showing up unannounced is rude. But our boy calmly said he decided to give her a gift. He pulled a total troll move by saying he bought the flower from Amelia's own guild. On top of that, he announced he'll only shop there from now on. The look of disgust on Amelia's face was worth seeing, but she suddenly bolted up. He didn't understand what the man was rambling about. She pretended to accept the gift and tried to kick him out, telling him to just go home. But Gislam said, "Sit down," with a smirk. Hearing the authority in that voice, Amelia froze in her tracks. When he turned around, he was in shock. Could this be the same weakling who used to tremble in front of him? Gislam cut to the chase and said he wanted 10,000 gold. Amelia's brows furrowed at the figure. She was seething with rage. Amelia couldn't help but ask if it was a family inheritance. But Gislam said it's just my job. And then he dropped the bomb. "I'm not marrying you anyway." The girl froze in surprise. Gislam took the insult a step further, saying she'd rather marry the muscular knight at the door. And at that moment he prepared to show his true power. But just then, Amelia's cat hissed fiercely as if it had seen a monster. The cat puffed up its fur and was challenging the man. Amelia stated in a cold voice that there's a limit to jokes and such things shouldn't be said. Gislam promised to keep the secret if the money was paid, but Amelia kept refusing like a stubborn mule. Finally, she called Bernard as if to say, "Hold this dog." The loyal servant burst in instantly and stood over Gislam. Gislam knew well that Bernard wasn't just a butler, but a maniac as dangerous as a master swordsman. He bluffed, saying a war would start if he died here, but Amelia called it, saying, "Don't worry, we'll just say you died like a perverted harasser." The plan was simple. The pervert who broke into the bride's room was meant to look like he was killed by the loyal bodyguard. The perfect murder. Amelia gave the order to finish the job. Bernard drew his sword like a machine, strictly following his master's word. Amelia had already crossed the line. But Gislam wasn't surprised at all. On the contrary, as if saying the fun was starting, he also grew serious and drew his sword. Bernard looked at his prey with a mocking smile on his lips. Gislam sized up his opponent and suddenly sensed something was wrong. He felt a shadow behind him. A sneaky shadow had moved. It turns out they weren't alone in the room. The assassin's blade struck from the blind spot, slicing through the air, but it only shredded the porch chair instead of Gislam. The man didn't stop. Our boy did a fancy flip and soared through the air. And stretching out her legs, she gave the man a powerful kick. The window frame came down with a loud bang. The guy flew out. Amelia and Bernard were speechless after seeing this show. Gislam rebelled against this disgraceful hospitality, asking, "Are you serving assassins to your guests?" He was driven mad with rage. He took his fighting stance, and steel clashed against steel. With sparks flying, Gislam didn't miss a chance to make a jab. He said there's no such thing as etiquette in the Riffold family, and they were raised in a stable. Bernard yelled that you were the one who lost respect first, kid, and that expecting a warm welcome was foolish, before landing his fatal blow. But the kid wriggled and slipped away like a snake. Ghislaine spun around, missed the kick, but hit the bullseye with the other leg. Big Bernard was stunned by that kick. While thinking this kid was clumsy, his face just went totally blank. Before the shock could wear off, Amelia shrieked from the sidelines. "Get serious, man. Quit playing around and bring me that brat's head." Bernard shivered when he saw that woman's psychopathic glare. Then he got serious and switched to killing mode. As for Ghislaine, she was just giggling at this theater. He found it funny that an ordinary knight was acting so cool in front of him. Bernard snarled. "Come on then, make my day, that's an invitation." Both tensed up for the final blow. Bernard lunged like a raging bull and was instantly right in Gislaine's face. But ours slipped back with reflexes as smooth as butter. Still, the speed of the bull was not to be underestimated. The tip of the sword left a tiny mark on Gislaine's cheek. No joke, he was fast. And so, the deadly dance has officially begun. They kept attacking and retreating, darting back and forth. Amelia's brain was about to melt as she watched from the sidelines. How could a loser like Ghislaine go toe-to-toe with a great knight? His joy faded as the battlefield turned into a bloody arena. Ghislaine blocked the steel aimed at her face at the last second. He quickly countered and lunged forward, trying to slash Bernard. Lucky guy dodged the blow. On top of that, he locked the sword and tried to skewer Ghislaine. He was a total mountain of muscle, bless him. Ghislaine. The same stale trick again? He asked. He leaped into the air, but at that moment, the electricity in the air changed. I got goosebumps. Bernard starting to exude an insane amount of meaning. "Those tricks won't work on me, kid," he said, showing his strength. After those two uses, Bernard easily parried Ghislaine's weak move and tossed the kid to the ground like a trash bag. Ghislaine's face contorted in pain from that bone-crushing blow she took. Bernard didn't wait. He was about to land a second blow before the other could even catch his breath. But Ghislaine slithered like a snake, dodging the sword and putting a few meters of distance between them. That was a close call. He hadn't counted on Bernard normalizing that move with mana. The room suddenly turned freezing. Bernard said you weren't the wimp the rumors made you out to be. He tossed Ghislaine's sword aside like trash and added, "You don't just have training, you have combat experience. Look at the ego on that guy." He didn't forget to add, "Your techniques are good, but I have thick skin, they won't work on me." "Bernard, you're done, kid." He was already in the zone. Ghislaine got serious, saying we've crossed the line now. Bernard aimed straight for the head. In close combat, it was impossible to beat this brute with technique alone. The physical difference was clear as day. So he thought dealing with Bernard was a waste of time. "Time's tight, let's wrap this up," he said. Bernard noticed something while attacking. Mana and strings. But by the time the penny dropped, it was already too late. At that moment, Ghislaine's sword was already at the man's neck. With a swift move, Ghislaine closed in on Bernard and slammed her knee into the middle of his face using all her strength. "Snap! Bernard! What the hell just happened?" he said, staggering back in a daze. Amelia's face turned pale as a sheet. His knight was getting beaten up. Ghislaine, with her sword drawn, was like a wolf watching its prey, and he was ready for the final blow. He brought the sword down like a sledgehammer, but Bernard was still standing, resisting like a stubborn goat. Immediately after, he turned and parried the attack. For a brief moment, he repelled Ghislaine and found a chance to breathe. Ghislaine landed on her feet like a cat. Bernard yelled at the girl, "Get out of here, I can't protect you." The man was about to play his last cards now. "Now, this is more like a fight," Ghislaine said, accepting the challenge. "It's been centuries since I've seen a worthy opponent," he muttered. Amelia began to run, trembling with fear. It stung him that Ghislaine was making a fool of him like this. He still thought someone leaked the guild info, and because of the rumors about Ghislaine, he figured the kid just got lucky in the past. What a huge mistake. Now he realized how wrong he was, in a bitter way. "What the hell are the guards I pay so much for doing?" he grumbled. He turned the corner, and saw the scene was a disaster. All his men were laid out flat on the ground. And in the middle stood a girl. He turned slowly when he heard the footsteps. Like a predator eyeing its prey, Belinda said. "Hello, darling." Shocked, Amelia asked, "Who the hell are you?" She shrieked. The girl said in a calm, eerie voice, "Shut up." And bam! Suddenly, he appeared behind Amelia. The cold blade against her throat froze Amelia in terror. As Belinda snatched the spider brooch off the girl, she marveled at Amelia's stupidity. I assume you wore this because of the engagement. The girl smirked. Belinda knew it full well. The rest of the family hated this spoiled girl. He was a maniac who created his own monsters for revenge because the bugs wouldn't leave him alone. Trauma or narcissism? That was unknown. Throwing the spider aside, that's not like you, honey, he said. Then he crushed that disgusting thing with a snap and demanded cooperation. A total psychopath. Bernard filled the room with such intense meaning that they thought the oxygen had run out. Ghislaine felt the air grow heavy like lead. This pressure was too much for ours. And Bernard, do you still think you can beat me, son? He was questioning the kid in style. He even had the nerve to provoke her, asking how she could ever compete with the noble Amelia in such a state. Ghislaine had accepted that she carried royal blood, but that simple guard in front of her didn't have the brains to process it. That classic tense silence hung in the air, and seconds later, a deadly dance of steel on steel began. Bernard is attacking like a man meant to keep his nobility unstained. He tried to corner Ghislaine with lightning-fast strikes, but our guide blocked them all. Yet death was closing in on him. In that scorching heat of battle, he realized Bernard had turned into a bull raging with fury. He attacked relentlessly, buzzing around like a fly. Until the patience of the hidden overflows, and they say enough. He gripped the hilt until the bones cracked. Bernard swung his sword and took his position to land that fatal blow. But Bernard, when it seemed all over, suddenly turned the tables, launched a counterattack, and managed to disarm his opponent. Wow! Dazed by the force of that final blow, Ghislaine reeled, while Bernard, intoxicated with victory, declared that the final curtain had fallen. The sword's tip was right at the throat of the secret. But on Bernard's face, instead of triumph, there was an expression of foolish bewilderment. Turns out our crazy girl sacrificed her own shoulder, getting hurt on purpose just to deflect the sword. What a masochistic tactic, though. Taking advantage of his opponent's mindless stare, Ghislaine instantly counterattacked, while Bernard was getting truly annoyed that this man wouldn't rest for even a second. He parried the sword again, landed a heavy kick to the ghoul's side, and yelled that there was a mountain of difference between showmen and true masters. Ghislaine hit her back against the wall so hard that the building shook. But the stubborn goat was still ready to fight. Ghislaine planned it out, and Bernard controlled the pace with speed and combos like a conductor. And in that direct collision, the swords locked as if they were welded together. They went neither forward nor back. Ghislaine knew he couldn't beat Bernard in his current state, but the key word here was current state. Right then, he realized Bernard was missing the most important part of the equation, that vital detail. The poor guy had no idea about Ghislaine's unique mana technique, of course. The moment he activated the technique, Ghislaine's speed took off like a rocket. And in the blink of an eye, she was right there by Bernard's side. The swords began a wild and deadly waltz once more. But just seconds later, he disarmed his hidden opponent. What the hell is happening? Look on Bernard's face was priceless. He couldn't fathom how this guy pulled so much mana in the heat of battle, but he froze as the sword tip touched his head. Just then, Belinda and Amelia burst onto the stage. He told Amelia that out of his grace, she could take the money and get the hell out. Ghislaine put him in his place. If you were going to give it, why didn't you give it when I asked nicely, woman? With those words, he pulled his sword off Bernard. While Belinda teased that it couldn't even be called a lover's spat, Ghislaine brushed it off, saying they simply couldn't agree on the matter. And then he dropped that bomb right on Amelia. The rates had changed, and the price of this job was now much higher. He wouldn't even give you the time of day for less than 20,000 gold. While Ghislaine made her cool exit, all hell had already started breaking loose in the palace. While Amelia was throwing tantrums and destroying the place, Bernard was pathetically apologizing and saying it was all his fault. The girl didn't even hear him. Mumbling about how much Ghislaine had changed, Bernard got a hard slap when he offered to inform Duchess Delphine. Amelia literally growled at the Duchess to be careful when she mentioned that terrible woman, Delphine. Turns out this snake was secretly working with that dangerous Duchess to wipe out the Perdium family. What a plot. But his real concern was what on earth he'd do if the trade guild's dirty laundry came out, so they had to pull the plug on Gisla. After hearing the woman's insane plan, Bernard bowed his head and accepted the order. He reported Ghislaine has a deep gash on his shoulder, scratches on his right side, and will need time to recover as he's drained of mana. But something was making Bernard feel sick. He said they shouldn't use their own knights for this dirty work. Amelia nodded like a grinning devil. They were going to release dogs specially trained for this job. Bernard felt his blood run cold at the woman's brutality. The woman ordered those war orphans, whose absence no one would notice without a family, to be sent to their deaths. A dozen disposable children with mana control. But Bernard, despite his disgust, was already planning that death trap where they would lie in wait. When she promised to prepare everything, Amelia was drooling, imagining how Gisela would pay for humiliating her. Meanwhile, unaware of anything, our hero continued on his way, trying to lick his wounds. His mind was on that treacherous snake Amelia. They were worried sick, but she said she's fine. They calmed everyone down with their vibe. The wound wasn't that deep for such a crazy move, and considering the reward at the end, it was definitely worth it. Now he had boatloads of money. He wanted to choke Amelia right then and there, but there was no sense in starting a war for no reason now. With the barbarians already causing trouble, Gislen decided to handle this smoothly with as little bloodshed as possible. And this time, he was going to use that sneaky Amelia like a pawn for his own interests. Bellin watched the child in silence before dropping the bombshell. Had everything gone as planned? Because he himself had given the order to take over security. He was ordered to take the girl hostage if sounds of fighting were heard. Ghislaine reluctantly agreed, saying she had no choice but to follow the plan. Just as he was about to ask Fergus something, that expected terrible pain stabbed his chest. The boy was about to collapse where he stood. When Ghislaine doubled over, everyone panicked. He was now paying a heavy price for pushing the third court too hard. He had to find a safe way to strengthen his spirit before his body collapsed, when suddenly his waist was seized. The girl checked his pulse and realized the boy's mana flow had turned into a total highway pileup. The situation was critical. A strange mystic light began to radiate from the maid's hands. Ghislaine could tell this girl was something special. His stomach turned and he thought he'd vomit, but instead of blood, a strange toxic air escaped his lungs. Gross but effective. The blockage in the mana channels has been cleared. Turns out such a miraculous treatment was possible through deep meaning compression. He trusted her because his mother brought her, but this maid knew much more than just dusting. Who was this mysterious woman? Ghislaine knew that powerful allies saved lives. With Belin's sudden death, he swore loyalty, saying, "I am with you, my Pasha." Then he asked what she'd do with the money. After a short silence, the kid dropped the bombshell. Only Amelia could find that money. Belin and Fergus were shocked to hear this plan. The maid reminded them they'd be flayed if they were caught. But the guy was totally chill, confident that Amelia wouldn't snitch. He gave Belinda a look like, "Trust me," and she fell for it. Belinda's blood ran cold when she heard where he would bury the money. The monster forest? This kid literally had a death wish. Ghislaine said in a very serious tone that they would clear the forest. It sounded like he was talking about pulling weeds in the backyard. Fergus was in revolt. It was a suicide mission attempted for a century, but one that no one could pull off. Ours cut them off and asked about the fate of the man he ordered before leaving. The old man didn't catch on at first. Then the penny dropped, and he said the nutcase they were looking for was right under their noses. Ghislaine wanted to leave right away. As for Belinda, let's go home. Or Amelia would have eaten us alive, he thought. He said we'd fight if necessary, but Ghislaine reminded him that conditions have changed and the stakes are much higher now. They had come to a desolate, ruined place to find a commander in charge. The place was like an abandoned haunted mansion. No one answered the door, but they had no doubt about the address. The door swung open suddenly, and out came a man hairy as a bear. Our folks were in shock. Was this Rex supposed to become a commander? Belinda whispered that the man was a month old. But Ghislaine knew the gem she was looking for was this scruffy man standing right before her. The man slammed the door in their faces. He tried to chase them away, saying, "Get lost, don't waste my time." I'm a Ghislaine Gillian. When he shouted, the mercenary froze in his tracks. The ghost of the past was on his heels. The man turned slowly. Everyone was in shock when Ghislaine reached out and said how much she missed him. Ratatosk mercenaries. Even after they disbanded, they were a legendary army of maniacs whose fame lived on. And their leader was this man standing before us. The moment Ghislaine asked us to join, it felt as if time had stopped. A massive axe sliced through the air with a whistle, passing right by Ghislaine and tearing her clothes to shreds. This sudden assassination attempt left everyone in the room speechless. Gillian roared at the top of his lungs, demanding to know how this man knew who he was, trying to figure out the intruder's intent. Thinking the man across from her had lost his mind, Belinda tried to force Ghislaine to pull back, but our boy didn't look like he was going to back down. He tried to calm things down, claiming he could save Giulio's daughter. Patients were burning with high fevers and coughing up blood as if their lungs were being torn out. Those caught by this curse writhed on the ground until they died. They didn't call this disgusting disease, eternal punishment, for nothing. Ilyan hugged his daughter as her painful screams echoed off the walls of the room. Luckily, Ghislaine realized it wasn't too late yet. In her previous life, Ghislaine couldn't hire this man because poor Gillian took his own life in grief after his daughter died. Judging by the ruins around him, the desperate father had spent his last penny on his daughter's treatment and fallen into misery. As the poor girl begged for death, unable to bear the pain any longer, Ghislaine realized he didn't have a single second to lose. Just as he was about to start treatment, a hand suddenly stopped him. Belinda intervened and ordered Ghislaine to leave at once. He questioned what they could do where even the high priest failed, but Ghislaine ignored this nonsense and pulled his arm away. He shouted that he was the only one who could save this girl, then turned to Belinda and asked one more time if she trusted him. Handing a piece of paper to the confused girl, he asked her to get the items on the list, but the contents left her terrified. In the future, they worked tirelessly on this disease that's now thought to be incurable, and thank God, a cure was found. Ghislaine remembered the recipe for the antidote down to the finest detail. The only problem was that the materials cost a fortune. Luckily, money wasn't an issue. He whipped up the medicine, handed the bottle to the man, and said Rachel should down it. Gillian gave the antidote to her daughter without a second thought. At first, it was a total disappointment, not a leaf stirred. But soon those disgusting spots on the girl's skin began to evaporate. As their numbers quickly dwindled, a peaceful expression spread across the girl's face. Everyone who saw this scene froze in shock. They watched with jaws dropped as the impossible happened and those terrible scars faded away. Gillian had a hard time believing the medicine actually worked. Ghislaine, I told you so, mood, stated that everything was running smoothly. Gillian asked how this was possible when even the greatest healers were helpless. Ghislaine calmly said that the power of saints isn't limitless, and it all comes down to the patient's will to live. The man's hands started shaking uncontrollably. He asked if his daughter would fully recover. When Ghislaine said she'd be fit as a fiddle in 2 months, a flicker of hope shone in Gillian's eyes. And then, weak-kneed from the shock, he collapsed right where he stood. He begged Ghislaine to tell him what she wanted to settle her debt. Because it was clear this guy didn't come here out of the goodness of his heart. All Gillian had left was this weary body. He was willing to swallow his pride and even become a slave. But Ghislaine said that the mercenaries only need a true leader. At that moment, Gillian looked deep into the young man's eyes, and a doubt stirred within her. What were these eyes really after? The man silently ran his hand through her thick braided hair and cut it from the root with a sharp axe that appeared in his other hand. Everyone froze in shock while looking at Gillian. They couldn't believe their eyes. It was as if a whole different, wild beast had appeared before them. He turned back, walked to the other end of the room, and asked if anyone else was with Ghislaine, maybe enemies. Ghislaine said everyone with her was already in the room. When Gillian asked if anyone was jealous, she fired back and said there'd be plenty more of them coming. Gillian suddenly grabbed the spear from the floor and threw it at the wall with all her might. The spear blasted a huge hole in the wall and stuck into a tree outside. Then Gillian gave the rope attached to the spear a hard tug. Yasusa literally dragged him inside like a fish on a hook. The moment he grabbed his throat, a muffled, painful grunt escaped the man. Gillian screamed about who sent him. The man mumbled in shock that it was impossible. Gillian asked what to do with this trash. But Ghislaine said to be quiet. Because the brat had already figured out who sent it. He just admitted he didn't want to get his hands dirty that day. But the man stopped her. Gillian announced she would clean up this mess herself. And with a single move, he grabbed his throat and finished him off right then and there. When the work was done, Ghislaine bowed respectfully. But Belinda had noticed something. The man didn't show the slightest hesitation in his movements. but she couldn't understand why Ghislain needed such a bloodthirsty man. By the way, Gillian swore an oath to dedicate her life to Ghislaina. Ghislain stated that he trusts the commander. Before long, Ghislain's jealous rivals heard the news. The scout regiment was officially wiped off the map. But one of them noticed they were making too much noise and calmed everyone down. The soldiers apologized to the captain. The captain continued to analyze the situation. He didn't think it was likely to Ghislain hunting spies on her own. Then, finding out she hired Gillian, the man flew into a rage and took it out on one of his soldiers. He grabbed him by the collar and screamed, asking if it was true. The man, trembling with fear, confirmed what he saw. The captain was pleased that Gillian was finally back out. Meanwhile, they were making their way through the forest. She kept complaining about how cramped the car was for her waist. He said Gillian wasn't involved in arms dealing. I mean, a sword or an axe would have been enough for him. Ghislain told him to drop the subject. We needed a car to carry Rachel anyway. He asked for patience. These could have worked. Then the girl asked if that spy had been sent by Amelia. Once approved, he declared this would be a headache. After all, the guy was wearing that famous Wildcat Guild mask. Ghislain knew this guild was illegal. Smugglers, killers, and drug dealers. It's a total dump. Beline said they are a dark guild, powerful and mostly filled with retired mercenaries.